Before we enter the monastery, we must understand what we're approaching. Imagine yourself traveling along a narrow path in early medieval Europe. Perhaps it's the 8th century, somewhere in what we now call England or Francia. The landscape around you is largely forest and open fields. Villages are scattered and distant from one another. And then, gradually, the trees seem to part, and you see it, the monastery. From a distance, the monastery appears almost like a small village unto itself. Thick stone walls enclose the space, not for defense in the way we might imagine fortresses, but rather to create a boundary between the world outside and the sacred space within. The walls are substantial and enduring. They've been built to last for centuries, constructed of heavy stone that has been carefully selected and fitted together with lime mortar. The most prominent feature is the church. Its stone walls rise higher than the surrounding buildings, and a simple cross marks its peak. There may be a bell tower, though in these earlier centuries, bells are rare and precious objects, often imported at great expense. The church is the spiritual heart of the monastery, but it is far from the only building within these walls. As you approach the gatehouse, you might observe several other structures. There's the cloister, a covered walkway surrounding a central open courtyard where monks move about their daily tasks. There are dormitories where the monks sleep. There's a refectory, a communal dining hall. There's a scriptorium where monks copy manuscripts. There are workshops, a bakery, a kitchen, a brewery. There's a library, though the word is grander than the reality. It's typically a small room with a modest collection of precious books, many of them handwritten and irreplaceable. The monastery is, in many ways, a self-sufficient community. It is not dependent on the outside world for its basic needs. The monks grow their own food in fields and gardens surrounding the monastery. They produce their own clothing, their own tools, their own candles. They maintain their own water supply. It is a complete world unto itself, designed to support the spiritual life of its inhabitants while providing for their physical needs. The scale varies. Some monasteries are very large, housing hundreds of monks. Others are small communities of perhaps 30 or 40 men. But the fundamental structure, the rhythm of life, the purpose of the institution remains similar across these variations. Before we step through the gate and into the monastery grounds, we should ask, why do these places exist? What draws men to commit their entire lives to living within these walls? The answer, fundamentally, is spiritual. These men have chosen a life dedicated to prayer, to the service of God, and to the preservation of learning during a time when much of Europe is fragmented and uncertain. The monastic movement began centuries before the time we're now exploring. In the 4th century, men began withdrawing into deserts and remote places to pursue a life of prayer and asceticism. Over the centuries, these solitary pursuits gradually became more organized. Rules were written, most famously the Rule of Saint Benedict, that established guidelines for how monks should live together, how they should structure their days, and what their priorities should be. By the time we arrive at our imagined monastery, in the 8th or 9th century, the monastic ideal has evolved into something more settled and systematic. The daily life of monks is shaped by a rigid structure that divides the day into hours of prayer, hours of work, hours of study, and hours of rest. This structure is not arbitrary. It reflects a theological understanding that all human activity, from the most sacred prayer to the most mundane labor, can be a form of worship if it is performed with proper intention and dedication. Now, let us imagine that the gatekeeper has admitted us. We step through the heavy wooden gate and into the monastery grounds. The sounds of the outside world, the birds, the distant voices of people on the road, suddenly seem very far away. We are entering a space designed for contemplation, for the slowing down of time, and for the focusing of human attention on spiritual matters. The stones beneath our feet are worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. We can sense the weight of history here, the accumulated presence of countless monks who have walked these same paths, prayed in the same church, worked in the same gardens, and slept in the same dormitory cells. Let us now begin our exploration of the daily life within these walls. We will follow the rhythm of monastic time, from the very first moments of the day until the monks retire for the night. We will observe their prayers, their work, their meals, and their brief moments of rest. We will try to understand, as much as we can from our distance in time, what it meant to live a monastic life, the discipline it required, the rewards it offered, and the way it shaped the spiritual and intellectual landscape of medieval Europe. Our journey begins in darkness. It is the middle of the night, perhaps 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, depending on the season and the specific traditions of this particular monastery. Most of the monastery is asleep. The vast majority of the monks are lying in their cells, small, sparse rooms, each containing a simple bed, perhaps a small writing desk, and very little else. But in the church, a small group of monks is already awake. These monks have taken their turn at the night vigil. The monastic day, according to the rule of Saint Benedict, and most other monastic rules, does not begin at dawn, as it does in the outside world. Rather, it begins in the middle of the night, with a service called matins, or nocturnes. This is the first of 7 daily prayer services that structure the monastic day. The night vigil is not something that every monk performs every night. Rather, the monks rotate through the various duties, including the responsibility of being awake for the night prayers. There is a certain honor in this duty, but also a certain difficulty. Being pulled from sleep in the deep middle of the night, even for a sacred purpose, requires discipline and commitment. The monks who are awake make their way through the dark corridors of the monastery. There are no electric lights, of course. The only illumination comes from candles and oil lamps, which cast flickering shadows on the stone walls. The monks move quietly, almost silently. Their footsteps are muffled by the simple fabric of their robes. Some of them may still be half asleep, moving almost automatically along paths they have walked thousands of times before. The church is already lit when they arrive. Other monks, including the cantor, the monk responsible for leading the singing, are already there, preparing the candles and arranging the books that will be needed for the service. The cantor is a position of some importance in the monastery. He must have a good memory for the liturgy, a pleasant voice, and the ability to lead others in singing, often without any musical accompaniment beyond the sound of human voices. The monks file into the church and take their places in the choir. This is an area of the church, typically divided into 2 sections facing each other across the center aisle, where the monks stand or sit during the liturgy. Each monk knows his assigned place from long practice. The arrangement reflects the hierarchy of the monastery. The abbot, the prior, and the senior monks have places of honor, while younger monks and novices take their places toward the back. The church itself is a space designed to focus the mind on spiritual matters. It is typically quite plain. There is an altar, usually at the east end of the church, sometimes elevated and approached by a few steps. There may be a crucifix, a simple wooden cross, or a more elaborate carved wooden or stone cross mounted on or above the altar. There may be a few religious images or icons, but ornament is generally minimal. The entire aesthetic is one of simplicity and focus. The monks settle into their places. There is a moment of stillness, of silence, and then the service begins. The first sound is typically the voice of the cantor, singing the opening words of the service. The words are in Latin, the language of the Church throughout this entire period. For monks who have studied Latin throughout their training, the language is as natural as any other. For those who entered the monastery as children and learned Latin there, it is the language of prayer and the Church, deeply embedded in their understanding of spiritual matters. The service follows a set structure. There are psalms, ancient Hebrew poems that have been part of Jewish and Christian prayer for centuries. The monks sing these psalms antiphonally, meaning that one section of the choir sings a verse, and then the other section responds with the next verse. This back and forth continues through the entire psalm. To modern ears, the sound might be somewhat monotonous. Gregorian chant, as this style of singing is often called, has a particular quality, a single melodic line without harmony, with words stretched across notes in a way that prioritizes the sacred text over musical complexity. But to the monks themselves, and to medieval Christians generally, this is the voice of the Church, the sound of heaven itself, translated into human language and music. Between the psalms, there are readings. A designated monk steps forward and reads passages from the Bible, often from the Old Testament, during the night vigil. The reading is typically in a rhythmic, measured voice. There is no attempt at dramatic interpretation or emotional expression. The words are allowed to stand on their own, to speak to the listeners in their own way. The service is long. A full Matin service might last for an hour or more, depending on the day and the specific traditions of the monastery. During Sundays and feast days, it can be even longer. The monks stand or sit through the entire service. There is no rushing. There is no looking at watches. There are no watches, after all, to see how much longer the service will last. There is only the moment at hand, the psalm being sung, the reading being delivered. For many of the monks, there is a peculiar quality to the experience. They are half asleep for much of the night vigil, having been pulled from sleep only moments before. Their minds may wander. They may find themselves caught between waking and dreaming, their consciousness drifting in and out of focus. This is not seen as a failure, exactly, but rather as an inevitable part of the human condition. They are doing their duty. They are showing up. The fact that their attention wavers is understood to be a weakness of the flesh rather than a failure of spirit. As the night vigil progresses, gradually, almost imperceptibly, the quality of darkness outside the church windows begins to change. The deepest part of the night passes. The stars seem to shift slightly in their positions, and eventually, though it is still dark when the service concludes, there is a sense that dawn is no longer distant. It will come, as it always does. The night, no matter how long it seems, is finite. The service concludes. The monks genuflect, a gesture of respect performed by bending one knee while keeping the other leg extended, and then file out of the church. For some of them, this is the end of their night duties, and they will return to their beds for a few more hours of sleep before the day truly begins. For others, there are other tasks to be performed in these hours before dawn. A few monks may head to the bakery. The bread for the monastery must be prepared, and baking takes time. The preparation, Mixing the dough, shaping the loaves, begins in these quiet hours before dawn, so that by the time the community gathers for their meals, fresh bread is available. Other monks may head to the kitchen to begin preparing the morning meal, and more importantly, to begin the day's work of gathering, preparing, and cooking food for the entire community. Water must be drawn. Vegetables from the garden must be retrieved and prepared. Any herbs or spices that will be used must be gathered and measured. Still others may have tasks in the scriptorium, the room where manuscripts are copied. A few candles are lit, and they settle into their work by this minimal light. The copying of manuscripts is not work that requires constant attention. It is meticulous, demanding careful attention to each letter, but it is also rhythmic and meditative. The movements of the hand become almost automatic. The scrape of the quill on parchment, the careful dipping of the pen in ink, the spacing of letters and words, these movements become a kind of meditation. But for most of the monks, after the night vigil, there is time to sleep. And sleep, in the monastic life, is a precious thing. The monks are allowed a certain number of hours of sleep each night, though the exact number varies depending on the season and the specific monastic rule followed by their community. In summer, when days are long, sleep might be shorter. In winter, when the dark lasts longer, sleep might be more generous. The cells where the monks sleep are not comfortable by modern standards. A simple bed, perhaps a wooden frame with straw or reeds woven across it, serves as the sleeping place. A thin blanket or two provide warmth. There may be a pillow, though in some traditions, a pillow is considered a luxury to be avoided. The cell is cold in winter. There is no fireplace or heater. The only warmth comes from body heat and the layers of clothing the monk wears even to bed. But to a monk who has committed to a life of simplicity and discipline, this is acceptable. The discomfort of the bed is not seen as a punishment, but rather as a reminder of the commitment to a life that is not focused on physical ease or pleasure. The body is seen as something that must be kept under control, kept from indulgence, kept from drawing the monk's attention away from spiritual matters. In the darkness of these sleeping hours, the monastery settles into a profound quiet. The only sounds are the wind through the stone corridors, the occasional movement of a monk, the distant sound of nocturnal animals in the forests surrounding the monastery walls. There is a peace here, a sense of stillness that is broken only by the knowledge that in just a few more hours the bells will ring again and the daily cycle will continue. The bell rings. It is still dark outside, though the darkness now has a different quality. The very first light of dawn, not yet visible, but perceptible in some subtle way, is beginning to tint the eastern sky. It is perhaps 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, depending on the season. The monks rise from their beds. There is no gradual waking here. The bell is the signal, and the monks are trained to respond immediately. To linger in bed after the bell has rung is a violation of the rule. The body is pulled from its rest, often before the mind is fully ready to be awake. This is not accidental. The difficulty of this transition, from the comfort and unconsciousness of sleep to the demands of wakefulness and duty, is seen as part of the spiritual discipline of monastic life. The monks dress quickly in the darkness of their cells. The clothing is always the same: simple robes, typically made of coarse wool or linen. In winter, they may wear additional layers. In summer, they may wear less. But the basic garment, the habit, is consistent. There is no choice involved. There is no individual expression through clothing. Everyone wears the same thing, And in that uniformity, there is a kind of equality and also a kind of suppression of individual ego. By the time the monks make their way through the corridors to the church, a small amount of light has begun to penetrate through the windows. Not real light yet, not genuine daylight, but something more than complete darkness. The candles in the church are already lit, casting their gentle glow throughout the space. The monks take their places in the choir again. This service is called Lauds, which means praises. It is the second prayer service of the day, and it welcomes the coming of the dawn. Like matins, it is structured with psalms, antiphons, readings and prayers, all sung or recited in Latin. Lauds is generally shorter than matins and is considered a somewhat gentler service. It is designed to transition the monks from the night vigil into the beginning of the active day. As this service concludes, the light outside the church windows is beginning to become genuinely visible. The sun, still below the horizon, is beginning to color the sky. Dawn is arriving. When Lauds concludes, the monks do not immediately disperse to their tasks. Instead, they process back to the refectory, the communal dining hall, where they gather for the day's first meal. This meal is typically very simple: bread, sometimes a small amount of cheese or dried fruit, and a drink. Often it is just bread and water, or perhaps weak ale. As the monks eat, one of their number stands on a small raised platform, the lectern, and reads to them. The reading is typically from a religious text, a scripture, a life of a saint, a commentary on scripture written by one of the church fathers. The monks eat in silence, listening to this reading. This too is part of the discipline and structure. Meals are not occasions for conversation or social bonding. They are occasions for nourishment and for feeding the mind and spirit through the reading. The meal is over quickly. The monks remain silent. They do not clear their own dishes or clean up after themselves immediately. Those tasks will be assigned to different monks on a rotating basis. The rotation of tasks ensures that every monk participates in the mundane work of maintaining the monastery. After the meal, there is a brief period where the monks gather in the church for a brief office called Prime. Prime is the third of the 7 daily prayer services. It is generally shorter than either matins or lauds, and it serves to begin the day officially, to commit the day's work to God, and to set the spiritual tone for the hours ahead. When Prime concludes, the abbot or prior, the senior leadership of the monastery, will announce the day's tasks and assignments. Different monks will be assigned to different duties. Some will work in the fields or gardens, some will work in the kitchen, some will continue with manuscript copying in the scriptorium, some will engage in maintenance tasks, repairing the buildings, mending clothing, or maintaining the monastery's infrastructure. Some will perform the various services and tasks that keep the monastery running smoothly. The announcement of tasks is not an occasion for negotiation or discussion. Each monk receives his assignment, and it is understood that he will perform this task with full dedication and attention. This acceptance of assigned work, without complaint or questioning, is seen as a fundamental part of monastic discipline. As the monks begin to disperse to their various tasks, the monastery awakens fully. The pre-dawn darkness has given way to morning light. The day has begun in earnest, and for the next several hours, until the next prayer service calls them back to the church, the monks will work. The monastery comes alive with activity, though alive is perhaps too energetic a word. There is movement, there is work being done, but it is done quietly, deliberately, without the hustle and bustle we might associate with modern activity. Let us follow several monks through their morning tasks, beginning with those who work in the fields and gardens. Just outside the monastery walls, fields stretch out in various directions. Some of these fields are devoted to grain, wheat or barley, which will be ground into flour for bread. Other fields contain vegetables, onions, carrots, cabbages, and various other crops that will provide nutrition through the year. There are also gardens devoted to herbs, herbs for cooking, herbs for medicine, herbs that have various practical purposes. The monks who work in the fields and gardens move through this landscape with a kind of quiet efficiency. Their work is divided by season, of course. In spring, there is planting to be done. In summer, there is weeding and tending to the crops. In fall, there is harvesting. In winter, there is very little field work, though there are other tasks: preparing the soil, tending to any hardy crops that can survive the cold, and other maintenance work. This morning, let us imagine it is late spring or early summer. The monks are engaged in weeding the vegetable garden. They move slowly along the rows of plants, their hands carefully pulling up the unwanted plants that grow between the cultivated crops. It is tedious work, requiring attention to detail so that the useful plants are not damaged. It is also work that allows for a certain kind of meditation. The hands engage in the repetitive motion, while the mind can turn to spiritual matters. The monk working in the garden is not thinking about how quickly he can finish. There is no clock to punch, no boss waiting to check on his progress. He works at the pace that allows the work to be done properly. If it takes all morning to weed the garden, then it takes all morning. As he works, he may whisper prayers to himself. Many monks engage in a practice called the prayer of the heart, where they repeat a simple prayer, often, "Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me," over and over, allowing this prayer to become almost like a breath, an underlying current to whatever he is doing. The weeding and the prayer become intertwined. The physical work becomes a form of spiritual practice. Or perhaps he is thinking about the reading he heard during breakfast. Perhaps he is turning over some passage of scripture, considering what it means, how it applies to his own life and spiritual journey. The work provides a framework, a structure within which the mind can work. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, a different kind of work is underway. The kitchen is a relatively spacious room, typically located near the refectory, so that food can be easily transported from cooking to dining. There are large cooking pots, some of them suspended over a fire. There are wooden tables where food is prepared. There are various tools, knives, spoons, ladles, necessary for cooking. The monks working in the kitchen are preparing the day's meals. There will be breakfast, which we have already observed. There will be lunch, which will typically be a more substantial meal, perhaps featuring a pottage, a kind of thick stew made with vegetables and grains, along with bread and beer. And there will be supper, which in some monastic traditions is lighter than lunch, sometimes consisting of just bread and cheese and beer. The work of cooking is repetitive and practical. Vegetables must be chopped, pots must be stirred, water must be boiled, bread must be tended in the oven, fire must be managed. The monks work together, each with their assigned tasks. There is generally very little talking. The work speaks for itself. The monk responsible for the bakery must time things carefully so that the bread is ready at the right moment. In the scriptorium, the copying room, a completely different kind of work is underway. The scriptorium is typically located in a room with good light, often near large windows. The monks working here are engaged in the meticulous work of copying manuscripts by hand. This is perhaps the most important work in the monastery. though it may not seem so to an outside observer. During this period in medieval history, printing has not yet been invented. Books are made entirely by hand. Each letter of each word on each page must be written out by a human being. This is extraordinarily labor-intensive and time-consuming. A single book might take months or even years to complete. And because books are so precious and rare, they are treated with enormous respect. The monk in the scriptorium sits at a writing desk, a sloped surface that provides a good angle for writing. In front of him is a sheet of parchment, a prepared animal skin, typically from a sheep or goat, that serves as the writing surface. The parchment is expensive and precious. Mistakes are costly. There is no erasing ink from parchment. If a serious error is made, the entire page may need to be scraped clean and rewritten, an enormous waste of material and time. In front of him is also an exemplar, a manuscript that serves as the copy text, the original from which he is copying. The monk reads a line or two from the exemplar, then copies it carefully onto his parchment. The process is slow. The letters must be formed precisely, consistently. The spacing must be correct. The ink must be the right consistency, not too thick, not too thin. The ink itself is a compound that the monks may make themselves. Iron gall ink, made from iron salts and oak gall extracts, is the standard. It is mixed to the proper consistency, and it is this ink that will make marks on the parchment that, with proper care, will last for centuries. As the monk writes, his hand moves in practiced, precise movements. His eyes move back and forth between the exemplar and his own page. The only sounds in the scriptorium are the scratch of quills on parchment, the occasional soft footstep, the gentle rustling of pages as someone turns a page in a manuscript. This work requires enormous concentration. A single distraction can result in a mistake, and so the scriptorium is kept quiet. The monks working here understand that they are engaged in work of the utmost importance. They are copying texts that are often the only existing copies in the entire region, perhaps in the entire world. If a manuscript is lost, and the scriptorium did not make a copy of it, that text may be lost forever. The copying of manuscripts is also, in a very real sense, an act of preservation and transmission. The monks are not just creating books, they are keeping human knowledge and spiritual wisdom alive, passing it from one generation to the next. It is sacred work. Meanwhile, other monks are engaged in tasks of maintenance and repair. One monk might be in the stone workshop, preparing mortar for repairs to the walls. Another might be mending a hole in one of the roofs. Another might be in the laundry area, washing the monks' robes and bedding. Another might be making candles, dipping rushes or rolled paper into melted animal fat or beeswax repeatedly until the candles have accumulated enough material to provide a useful light source. All of these tasks are understood to be part of the monastic life. There is no hierarchy of tasks where some work is seen as more important or more spiritual than others. The monk who is copying manuscripts and the monk who is mucking out the latrine are engaged in equally important work. The only difference is the specific form the work takes. But if both monks are doing their work with full attention and dedication, with the understanding that they are serving God and their community, then both are engaged in spiritual practice. As the morning progresses, there is a steady rhythm to the monastery's work. The sun climbs higher in the sky. The bells in the church tower mark the passage of time. And at a certain point in the morning, as the monks are working, the bell rings again. It is time for the next prayer service. The bell's ringing is a signal recognized throughout the monastery. Wherever the monks are working, in the fields, in the kitchen, in the scriptorium, in the various workshops, they hear it, and immediately they begin to make their way back to the church. The work is not abandoned abruptly. There is an understanding that the work will be set aside, but it is set aside carefully. A monk in the fields might finish pulling weeds from the plant he is working on. A monk at the scriptorium might finish writing the word he is in the middle of. A monk in the kitchen might ensure that the fire is properly tended and that nothing will burn while he is away. And then they move toward the church. This service is called terce, and it is one of the shorter prayer services. It follows the same general structure as the other services: opening prayers, psalms sung antiphonally, readings, closing prayers, but it is typically completed in 15 to 30 minutes, depending on the specific traditions of the monastery and the day of the week. The purpose of terce is to mark the progress of the morning and to refocus the monks' spiritual attention before they return to their work. It is also one of the 3 little hours brief services, spaced throughout the day, that serve as check-ins, spiritual moments that prevent the monks from becoming too absorbed in their work and forgetting the spiritual purpose that underlies everything they do. When terce concludes, the monks file back out of the church and return to their various tasks. The rhythm has been interrupted, but not broken. The work continues, but it does so with a sense of spiritual renewal. The monks have been reminded of what they are ultimately working for. They return to their tasks with a renewed sense of purpose. The work continues through the remainder of the morning. The sun climbs higher. The shadows cast by the buildings grow shorter. The heat of the day, if it is summer, grows more intense. And eventually, as midday approaches, the monks begin to feel the effects of the morning's work. They are hungry, they are tired, and they are ready for the meal and rest that midday will bring. As the sun reaches its highest point in the sky, marking midday, the bell rings again. This time, it is not calling the monks to a prayer service. It is calling them to the most substantial meal of the day, the midday meal, which is typically called dinner in medieval monasteries. The monks make their way back into the monastery proper and to the refectory. They wash their hands and faces in basins of water provided for this purpose. The water is cold and often not entirely clean by modern standards, but the monks use it to remove the dirt and sweat from their morning's labor. They file into the refectory and take their usual places at long wooden tables. The tables are simple, made of sturdy wood, worn smooth by years of use. The plates or bowls are simple too, pottery or wooden vessels, nothing fancy. The utensils are minimal, a spoon and perhaps a knife. Forks, if they exist at all, are not used in most of medieval Europe at this time. The food is set out. Bread, obviously, the staple of every meal. There is pottage, a thick stew of vegetables and grains. There may be cheese if the season is right and the monastery's dairy animals are producing well. There may be eggs. There may be dried fruit. There may be beer or ale, and there is certainly water. One of the monks stands at the lectern again and begins to read. This time, the reading is often from a saint's life, a narrative of a saint's spiritual journey, their trials and tribulations, and the miracles associated with them. The reading is often quite lengthy and may continue for several meals if the text is long enough. The monks eat in silence, attending to the reading. The meal is hurried, but not rushed. It is efficient. The monks eat enough to provide themselves with nourishment, but they do not eat to excess or linger over the meal. Gluttony is understood to be a vice, and even in eating, monks practice a form of restraint. As they eat, there is a certain peace to the scene. The refectory is quiet except for the voice of the reading monk. The sounds of silverware or bowls are minimal. The monks are largely absorbed in the food and the reading. It is a moment of rest from their morning's labor, but it is not a moment of idleness or frivolity. When the meal concludes, the tables are cleared. Again, this work is divided among the monks. Some clear the dishes, others wash them, others sweep the floor to remove any debris from the meal. The work is done methodically and thoroughly. After the meal, some of the monks have a period of rest. This rest is taken in their cells, the simple rooms where they sleep at night. This rest period, typically an hour or so, is sometimes referred to as a siesta, though the term is more commonly applied to Mediterranean cultures. But the principle is the same. After the morning's work and the midday meal, the monks rest for a brief time before returning to their afternoon duties. The rest is not seen as a luxury or as mere relaxation. Rather, it is understood as a necessary part of maintaining the body so that it can continue to work effectively. A rested monk is a more productive monk, and productivity in service of the monastery's mission is valuable. During this rest period, the refectory is cleaned thoroughly, the dishes are dried and put away, the floor is swept, and if necessary, washed. Any stains or spills are addressed. The refectory is left in perfect condition for the next meal. For some monks, this midday period is not a time of rest. Those on duty at the kitchen continue their work, preparing for the evening meal. Those whose turn it is to work in the fields and gardens return to their tasks. The rotation of duties ensures that the work of maintaining the monastery is never neglected, and also ensures that over time, every monk gains experience with every task. There is wisdom in this. A monk who has never worked in the kitchen does not truly understand the effort required to feed the community. A monk who has never copied manuscripts does not fully appreciate the work of preserving texts. As the afternoon begins and the monks who have rested return to their tasks, the monastery settles into a quieter rhythm. The work continues, but the pace is slightly slower. The heat of the day, if it is summer, may slow everyone down. Tempers might be slightly shorter, and the discipline required to maintain focus and dedication is slightly greater. The afternoon work is, in many ways, a continuation of the morning work. The monks return to their fields, their workshops, their copying desks. The tasks are the same ones they were doing before the midday meal, or they are different tasks, depending on what needs to be done and what the prior or abbot has assigned. But there is a subtle shift in the quality of the afternoon compared to the morning. The afternoon feels slower. The energy that comes from having just woken up and begun the day is no longer present. The monks are still dedicated to their work, still performing their tasks with the same attention and care, but there is a weariness that begins to set in. This is not something to be resisted or regretted. Weariness is understood to be a natural consequence of physical work. It is not a sign of weakness or failure. Rather, it is simply the way the body responds to labor, and there is even something spiritually valuable about weariness, about pushing through the fatigue and continuing to perform one's duties with dedication despite the difficulty. A monk in the fields, feeling the accumulated effect of hours of work, of bending over rows of plants, of pulling weeds, might experience a moment of genuine spiritual struggle. His body is tired, his hands are sore, his back aches, he wants to stop, and yet he continues. He pulls another weed, he moves to the next plant. This continuation, despite difficulty, is seen as a form of virtue. In the scriptorium, a monk might feel his eyes beginning to blur from hours of close work copying tiny letters. The light from the window, though it was excellent this morning, is now beginning to shift as the sun moves across the sky. The afternoon light is beginning to come in at a different angle, creating shadows that make the work slightly more difficult. He adjusts his position slightly, trying to find the best angle to continue his work. He dips his quill again. He continues. Every word he copies is a prayer, an act of dedication. In the kitchen, the monks are preparing for the evening meal. This meal will be simpler than the midday meal, perhaps just bread, cheese, and beer. But it still requires preparation. Water must be heated. The kitchen must be tidied. The evening's cooking must be completed by a certain time so that the food is ready when the monks gather. As the afternoon progresses, there is a sense of anticipation building. The monks know that another prayer service is approaching. Soon the bell will ring for none the sixth prayer service of the day, which occurs in the late afternoon. And then, after a brief return to work, there will be Vespers, the major prayer service of the evening, which marks the transition from day to night. The afternoon light begins to change color. If it is spring or summer, the sun is still high enough that the afternoon light is bright and warm, but there is a golden quality to it, a hint that the day is beginning to move toward its conclusion. If it is fall or winter, the light is more muted, the shadows more pronounced. The days are shorter, evening is coming earlier. The monks feel this shift in the light, even without checking a timepiece, and most monks have no access to such devices. They have an internal sense of time. Their bodies know when the afternoon is drawing to a close. There is a rhythm to the monastic day that becomes embedded in the body after years of following the same schedule, day after day, year after year. And sure enough, as the monks sense that none is approaching, the bell rings. The call to prayer comes again, and the monks, wherever they are, begin to make their way back to the church. None is a brief service, similar in length and structure to terce. It marks the 9th hour of daylight, the 9th hour counting from dawn, though depending on the season, this might be significantly earlier or later in the day than the actual 9th hour would be in modern timekeeping. The service is a brief spiritual check-in, a moment to pause the afternoon's work and turn attention back to prayer. When none concludes, the monks have a very short period to return to their tasks, often no more than 30 minutes or an hour, depending on the monastery and the time of year. Some monks may return to their work briefly. Others may begin to move toward the preparation for Vespers, the most important prayer service of the day, aside from the night vigil. Vespers, the word comes from the Latin for evening, is a more substantial service than the little hours. It includes more psalms, often includes a hymn, includes prayers of thanksgiving for the day that is ending, and includes prayers of petition for the night ahead. The service typically lasts for 30 to 45 minutes, and it is timed to coincide with the actual sunset, with the transition from day to night. As the monks gather in the church for Vespers, the light outside the windows is undergoing a dramatic transformation. The bright afternoon light is fading. The sky is taking on shades of orange and red and purple, depending on the weather and the season. The church, which has been relatively brightly lit all day from the windows, is beginning to grow dim. Candles are lit. candles that the monks themselves have made from animal fat, or if the monastery is wealthy, from beeswax. The monks take their places in the choir, and the service begins. Unlike the night vigil, which begins in complete darkness, Vespers begins in the remaining daylight and ends in darkness. There is something deeply moving about this progression. As the monks sing the psalms and prayers, they are literally singing through the transition from day to night, from light to darkness. Some of the psalms sung at Vespers have been sung every evening for centuries. They carry the accumulated spiritual weight of generations. O God, make speed to save me. O Lord, make haste to help me. The words echo through the church, sung in unison by the monks, their voices rising and falling in the ancient pattern of Gregorian chant. The final psalm of Vespers is often the Magnificat, Mary's song of praise from the Gospel of Luke. My soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Saviour. The words are words of praise and thanksgiving, and they are sung with a particular sense of reverence and devotion. As Vespers concludes, night has fallen. The church is lit now primarily by candles. The monks' faces are illuminated by the flickering light. There is a solemnity to the moment. The day has ended. The night is beginning. The monks genuflect and file out of the church, but they do not immediately disperse to their evening activities. First, they gather in the refectory for the evening meal. The evening meal is simpler than the midday meal. There is bread. Always. There is likely cheese. There may be some leftover pottage from the midday meal. There is beer or ale and water. The meal is quick, meant more to provide basic nourishment than to be a substantial eating experience. Again, a monk reads from the lectern during the meal. This reading is typically from a spiritual text, perhaps from the writings of one of the church fathers, such as Augustine or Jerome. These readings are meant to nourish the spirit, as the food nourishes the body. The meal concludes as quickly as it began. The refectory is cleared and cleaned, and then the monks have a period of free time before Compline, the final prayer service of the day. This period of free time, typically an hour or so, is one of the few times during the day when the monks have some choice in how they spend their time. Some monks might return to the scriptorium to continue copying manuscripts. Some might spend time in private prayer in the church. Some might spend time in spiritual reading in the library or in their cells. Some might engage in light maintenance tasks or prepare materials for the next day's work. This is a quieter time, a gentler time. The day's work is largely complete. The monks are tired, but not exhausted. There is a certain peace to the evening, a sense of the day settling into its conclusion. Some monks might spend this time in contemplation, sitting quietly in their cells or in the church, simply being present to their thoughts, to their prayers, to their spiritual state. Contemplation is valued highly in monastic spirituality. It is not seen as doing nothing or wasting time. Rather, it is seen as one of the most important activities a monk can engage in, the direct encounter with the divine through prayer and inner stillness. For a monk sitting alone in his cell in the gathering darkness, the only light coming from a single candle, there is a particular quality to this contemplative moment. The day is fading, his body is tired, his mind is relatively quiet. The world outside the monastery walls seems very far away, and in this state, he turns his attention inward, toward God, toward the eternal, toward the spiritual reality that he believes is more real and more enduring than the material world around him. This contemplative practice is difficult. The mind tends to wander, thoughts intrude, Memories surface. Worries about the next day's work arise. But the monk has trained himself to gently turn his attention back, again and again, to his prayer, to his focus on God. It is a discipline, like any other discipline practiced in the monastery, but it is a discipline that many monks find deeply rewarding. As the evening progresses, there is a sense of the monastery preparing for night. The tasks that were ongoing during the day are being wrapped up. Tools are being put away. Fires in the kitchen are being banked. The coals allowed to cool slowly so that they can be rekindled the next morning without having to start completely fresh. Candles are lit throughout the monastery to provide light as darkness falls. Water is drawn and provided in the various locations where it will be needed during the night. Everything is being prepared for Compline, the final service, which is approaching. As full darkness falls and the hours of the evening have passed, the bell rings for the final time that day. This is Compline, the last of the 7 prayer services, the conclusion of the monastic day. Compline is a shorter service, typically lasting 20 to 30 minutes. It is structured differently from some of the other services. It always includes the same psalms, the 4th, the 91st, and the 134th psalms, and the same prayers. Because it is always the same, the monks know it by heart. There is no need for a cantor to lead them in careful attention. The service is almost automatic, a familiar ritual that closes the day with a kind of ceremonial finality. The service includes a confession of sins. The monks acknowledge their failures and shortcomings during the day that has just passed. They ask for forgiveness. They commit themselves to trying again tomorrow to live up to their monastic vows. This confession is not made to a priest in the formal way that confession occurs at other times. Rather, it is a communal acknowledgement of human weakness and a prayer for God's mercy. Compline includes the singing of the Nunc Dimittis, Simeon's prayer of dismissal from the Gospel of Luke. Lord, now lettest thou thy servant depart in peace, according to thy word, for mine eyes have seen thy salvation. The prayer is an evening prayer, a prayer of release, of letting go, of accepting the end of the day and the approaching sleep. As Compline concludes, there is a particular moment, a blessing given by the abbot or the prior, that marks the official end of the monastic day. The monks are dismissed. They are directed to return to their cells to prepare for sleep. A final injunction is often given. Let us bless the Lord. Thanks be to God. The monks file out of the church. They move quietly through the dark corridors, back toward the dormitory where their cells are located. Many of them carry small candles to light their way. Some know the path so well that they could navigate in complete darkness. In their cells, the monks prepare for sleep. The preparation is minimal. They may change out of their outer robes, though many monks sleep in some of their clothing for warmth. They use the latrine facilities. They splash water on their face from a basin kept for this purpose. Then they lie down on their simple beds. The darkness is nearly complete. Only the faintest light might come through a small window, and this only if there is moonlight outside. Most likely, the cell is in complete darkness. The monk lies in the darkness, feeling the hard frame of the bed beneath him, the thin blanket above him, the cold of the stone walls surrounding him. The silence of the monastery at night is almost palpable. It is broken only by occasional sounds, the wind through the corridors, perhaps the distant sound of an animal outside the walls, perhaps the breathing of another monk in a nearby cell. But mostly, there is silence, a deep, profound silence that is rare in the world outside the monastery. In this silence, the monk's mind may turn to prayer. He may recite familiar prayers silently to himself. He may engage in the prayer of the heart, the repetition of a simple prayer like, "Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me." Or he may simply lie in the darkness and feel the transition from wakefulness to sleep approaching. The day has been long, the work has been demanding, his body is ready for rest, his mind is beginning to slow down. Sleep comes gradually, and then suddenly the monk is asleep, unaware of the moment of transition. His body rests. His mind, in sleep, may engage in dreams that are beyond his conscious control. Dreams that may be influenced by the day's activities, the spiritual practices he has engaged in, or simply the random neurological activity of a sleeping brain. The monastery settles into the deepest silence of the night. Most of the monks are sleeping now. The only activity is what we saw at the very beginning of this journey, the night watch. The monks who are awake for the night vigil, preparing the church for the matin service that will begin a few hours before dawn. And so the cycle continues. The day has ended. The night vigil will come. The dawn will follow. The bells will ring again. And the monks will rise to begin another day in the monastery, following the same rhythm, the same structure, the same dedication to their spiritual life that has defined their existence since they took their vows and entered these stone walls. To someone from the modern world, the monastic day might seem repetitive, even tedious. The same prayer services, day after day, the same meals, the same work, the same schedule, varied only by the seasons. How do monks endure this sameness? How do they avoid going mad from the monotony? The answer lies in understanding how the monks themselves perceive time and meaning. For a monk who has committed to the monastic life, repetition is not seen as a curse. It is seen as a blessing. The repetition of the prayer services, for instance, is not meant to be boring. Each day, when the monk sings the Psalms, he is encountering words that have been sung for centuries. He is joining his voice with all of the monks throughout history who have sung these same words. He is part of a great chorus that extends back through centuries and, he believes, extends forward into eternity. Moreover, even though the same psalms are sung day after day, they are not heard in exactly the same way each day. A word that seemed merely informative when the monk heard it 3 weeks ago might suddenly strike him as personally meaningful today because of what he is experiencing, what he is contemplating, what spiritual state he finds himself in. The psalm does not change, but the monk's relationship to it does. Similarly, the repetitive work, the copying of manuscripts, the tending of gardens, the preparation of meals, is not seen as meaningless drudgery. Each act is understood to be performed in service of God. When a monk copies a manuscript, he is not thinking about how many words per hour he is copying, or how many days until the manuscript is complete. He is thinking about each letter, each word. He is thinking about the meaning of what he is copying. He is offering his work as a prayer. The passage of time in the monastery is marked not by the ticking of clocks, or by the completion of projects, or by the achievement of goals. Rather, it is marked by the progression through the liturgical calendar, the cycle of Christian holy days and seasons that repeat each year. The season of Advent preparing for Christmas, the season of Lent preparing for Easter. Ordinary time between these great festivals. Each season has its own character, its own spiritual meaning. A monk who has lived in the monastery for 20 years has lived through this cycle 20 times. He has marked 20 Christmases, 20 Easters, 20 Pentecosts. He has seen the seasons turn 20 times. And yet, each time through the cycle, it is new. Each Easter is a unique encounter with the mystery of Christ's resurrection. Each Christmas is a fresh meditation on the Incarnation. The rhythm becomes internalized, but it does not become meaningless. For a monk, there is also a different relationship to physical time. Without mechanical clocks, time is measured primarily by the position of the sun in the sky and by the ringing of bells. These measurements are approximate. They vary with the season. They are not precise in the way modern timekeeping is precise. This lack of precision is not seen as a problem, it is simply the way things are. Time is fluid, flexible, oriented toward the natural rhythms of day and night, light and dark, rather than toward the artificial divisions of hours and minutes. This different relationship to time has profound implications. A monk is not constantly fighting against time, trying to save time, worrying that time is running out. Rather, he is embedded in time, moving through it at the pace set by the natural world and by the rhythm of the liturgy. There is a peace in this, a kind of surrender to the flow of time, rather than a constant struggle against it. And then there is the question of meaning. For a modern person, meaning often comes from achievement, from completing projects, from advancing in a career, from accumulating possessions or status. For a monk, meaning comes from something altogether different, from the pursuit of spiritual transformation, from growing closer to God, from deepening his understanding of spiritual truth. The monk does not measure success by how many manuscripts he has copied or how many vegetables he has harvested. Rather, he measures it by the state of his spiritual life. Is he growing in virtue? Is he becoming more patient, more humble, more compassionate? Is his prayer life becoming deeper? Is he experiencing moments of spiritual insight or connection with the divine? These are the measures that matter. This is not to say that the monk's work is meaningless or that they take no pride in doing work well. Rather, it is to say that the pride they take in work is different from the pride that a modern person might take. A monk is proud of the manuscript he has copied, but not because it will bring him recognition or advancement. He is proud because the work was done well, because every letter was formed carefully, because he did his best, and this pride is offered to God as part of his service. The monastic life, then, is not a life of meaninglessness despite its repetition. Rather, it is a life whose meaning is found in the structure, the repetition, the dedication to a spiritual purpose. The days and weeks and years blend together into a kind of timelessness, and in this timelessness, the monk has the opportunity to pursue the spiritual transformation that is the true purpose of the monastic vocation. We have now spent a full day in the monastery, following the monks from the deep darkness of night, through the dawn, through the day's work, through the evening prayers, and into the night again. We have observed their prayers, their work, their meals, their brief periods of rest. We have tried to understand how they structure their time, what motivates them, and what they are seeking in their commitment to this life. As we prepare to depart, to return to our own world outside the monastery walls, let us consider what we have witnessed and what it might mean. The monastic life, at least as it is lived in this medieval monastery, is characterized by several profound commitments. First, there is the commitment to community. The monks do not live in isolation, as some of the earliest Christian monastics did. Rather, they lived together, sharing space, sharing meals, sharing work. This requires constant discipline and sacrifice, the suppression of individual preferences in favor of communal needs, the acceptance of authority, the willingness to perform work that one might not choose to do. Second, there is the commitment to discipline and structure. The monastic day is not governed by individual choice or preference, but by a structured schedule that repeats day after day. This discipline is not imposed as punishment, but accepted as a path to spiritual growth. The discipline of the body, the early rising, the sparse food, the hard bed, is meant to loosen the grip of physical desires and allow the monk to focus on spiritual matters. The discipline of time, the structured day, the prayer services, the assigned work, is meant to focus the monk's attention and energy on his spiritual purpose. Beneath all of the external structure, the rules, the work, and the prayer services, there is a single underlying motivation: the pursuit of a deeper relationship with God, the cultivation of spiritual virtue, and the gradual transformation of the self from a state of spiritual confusion and disorder into a state of peace, clarity, and holiness. Fourth, there is the commitment to service. Service to God through prayer, service to the community through work, and service to the wider world through the preservation of knowledge, through the copying of manuscripts, and through their prayers, which they believe benefit the entire world. These commitments have sustained monks for centuries. They continue to do so in the present day, though the forms may have changed. The medieval monastery we have imagined, with its stones and its candlelight, its hand-copied manuscripts, and its water drawn from wells, no longer exists in quite this form. But monasteries continue to exist. Men and women continue to commit themselves to monastic life, and the underlying spiritual purposes remain the same. As we leave the monastery, passing back through the heavy wooden gate, we return to the outside world. The sounds of the world, birds, wind, distant voices, suddenly seem loud after the profound silence of the monastery. The light is bright after the dimness of candle-lit interiors. The pace feels rushed, anxious, after the slow, deliberate pace of monastic time. But perhaps we carry something with us from our time here. Perhaps we have glimpsed the possibility of a different way of living, a way oriented not toward constant productivity, not toward the accumulation of possessions or status, but toward the cultivation of spiritual depth, toward peace, toward the deliberate slowing of time to a pace at which it is possible to truly pay attention to what matters most. The monastery will continue on after we leave. The monks will ring the bells for matins tonight, just as they always do. They will rise in the darkness. They will sing their prayers. They will work. And this life will continue, day after day, season after season, year after year. It is a life that seems strange to modern sensibilities, yet it has nourished human spiritual seeking for centuries. We depart now, but we do so with gratitude for the glimpse we have been given into this remarkable way of living, a way that, while it may not be our own path, offers lessons about discipline, about community, about the possibility of meaningful human existence oriented toward purposes larger than the self.